Hello again, and welcome to the final video of our series, Our Great Awakening. Today, we'll be looking at a great warning. A great warning that was given to us many decades ago through the works of Aldous Huxley and George Orwell. Eileen.
Yes, Declan, we're talking today about the warnings given to us through George Orwell's novel 1984 and Aldous Huxley's novel Brave New World. They come under the format of a dystopia novel. A dystopia novel is a novel where things in society go awry and people suffer because of that. And the opposite of that is utopia, where everything is great, people are happy. But these two novels come under dystopia, and they're in very, very different ways. And I'm going to explain that to you. 1984 was written by Orwell in 1949, just when the Cold War was starting. And Brave New World was written by Huxley in 1932, when he was experiencing and criticising his own society, satirising his own society, which was a society of consumerism. Now, they're both a warning. They're not an accurate prophecy. And in our last video, we talked about handing over our sovereignty and our freedom, or allowing it to be taken from us. And these novels are both, each is a warning as to the kind of society that might be develop, or that could develop, if we hand over our freedom, our sovereignty. What could happen in a future scenario is what we're looking at. Now, 1984 is about the terrifying possibilities of totalitarianism. We're introduced to the one-party state and the one-person state, where one person has total power, the dangers that that might bring. And we meet the party, we meet Big Brother, as we spoke about in a previous video. We're introduced to room 101, where all the torture is taking place, where physical torture is seen to be the main way in which people are made to obey orders. We're introduced to the thought police, and we're introduced to junior spies. Those are young children who are taught to spy on their parents and report them to the authorities. And we're introduced to the whole idea of double think and double speak. And that is simply the ability to hold two contradictory ideas at the same time. Now, the main themes in 1984, first of all, we've got the psychological and the physical intimidation, very much part of the novel. We've got the role of technology in enabling oppressive governments to monitor and control their citizens. We've got the use of language as mind control. The country in that novel is called Oceania, and the language is called Newspeak. All new words developed to bring positivity to society and do with negativity. And all these words are they're intended to suit an agenda. And we see that very much today. Words such as new norm, staycation. We don't talk about not being allowed to go on holidays. It's all staycation. See how the negativity has been turned into the positive side of it. Social distancing, circuit breaker, all new words, newspeak. And the main character in that novel is Winston. And Winston is employed in the Ministry of Truth. He is changing history documents and falsifying them in order to fit the agenda. The other themes are manipulation, psychological manipulation, where, for example, the state invents enemies and teach the people about these enemies, and then people rally around their government against these enemies. The importance of knowledge of the past and the control of history, and how propaganda can be made to instill into people how the failings and shortcomings of their government can be made to look like successes. And at the end of all this, Winston is sitting and he's tracing in the dust 2 + 2 = 5. And there you have the double think and the double speak. He has been convinced through room 101, the torture, his big fear was fear of rats, and he was covered in rats in the room 101 and only allowed out when he got over this fear. So he has been programmed and worked upon with propaganda to write 2 + 2 = 5, even though he knows that's not true. And we mentioned this too in the Emperor's New Clothes, our very first video, where people can be convinced and made to say and pretend one thing is true when they know it's not. Now, there are some very important quotations from that novel. The first one is, "War is peace." Now, how can war be peace? Well, according to Orwell, he's saying that a common enemy keeps people united. So there is the meaning of war is peace. Second one, freedom is slavery and slavery is freedom. Well, how do you work out those contradictions? Well, according to Orwell again, the man who is independent is doomed to fail, whereas the man who is subjective to the collective will is free from danger and want. And the next quotation is, "Ignorance is strength." Well, how does that come about? According to Orwell again, the inability of the people to recognise the contradictions. That's what cements the power of the authoritarian regime. And the last quotation is, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past." And what does that mean? It simply means that, again, according to Orwell, control of the past ensures control of the future, because the past can be treated as a set of conditions that justify or encourage present or future goals or actions. And the party actually creates a past as a time of misery and slavery, and then claims to have liberated its citizens, to liberate them from that terrible situation they were in. And then they become their heroes and they gain support from the people. Now, Brave New World is also a dystopian novel, one about an awful where things go awry in society, but in a different way. This one is set in the year 632 AF, not BC, AF, after Ford. Henry Ford being the person who developed the motor car, the Henry Ford, the Model T, and the development lines, mass assembly lines, mass consumerism, mass commercialisation. The 1920s, the roaring 20s, when consumerism and the amount of development and the amount of production a country could make and the amount of consumerism going on in it was the key to, or the measure of success for that country, the roaring 20s. And Huxley is satirising that. That's why he's called it AF, after Ford, not BC, but AF, after Ford. And the novel opens in the Central London Hatching and Conditioning Centre. The director is taking a group of boys on a tour of the centre. And there they're witnessing the pod snap system of development, the process that allows the hatchery to produce thousands of nearly identical human embryos, producing them in large numbers for future citizenship. There are 5 castes. You've got the alpha, the beta, the gamma, the delta and the epsilon. The alpha, they're the best. They're the ones destined to be the leaders and the thinkers of society. And each of the succeeding castes there are conditioned to be slightly less physically and intellectually impressive. And the epsilon, the very lowest ones, they're stinted and stupefied by oxygen deprivation and chemical treatments because they're destined to perform menial labour. So they don't need any of the same attributes the other ones need. We also see the techniques of sleep teaching and the use of psychological technologies to control future behaviour of these world state citizens through conditioning and programming. We've got babies in a room and they're crawling around and they're crawling towards the flowers and the books. And every time they get within touching distance, they get this electric shock running through them. So they're being programmed to not go there anymore. And another theme is the use of technology to control society, as in producing humans for specific tasks. Now, science is in search of the truth, and science develops technology. But as Hitler said, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. And so the state often tries to curtail and to control science. And very often the state takes over the technology and uses it for other purposes than it was intended. The prime example being nuclear power. Nuclear power was developed by science, but the state took it over and used it to make weapons to kill people. It's the consumer society that Huxley is satirising in that novel there. And he's also talking about how happiness and truth are incompatible. And he says it's better to keep people happy than to keep them knowing the truth. And they're allowed the use of soma. Soma is a drug that they can smoke, and it keeps them happy, keeps them in a happy state. But all the human truths, such as love, friendship and personal connection, they're all being denied them. They're not taught those. And to sum that up, those two novels, 1984 is all about warning us about how control, maintained through constant government surveillance, secret police, torture, force and intimidation could be a possible happening in future years if we surrender our sovereignty. On the other hand, Brave New World is about warning us about power maintained through technological interventions that start before birth. And you have the nurse there injecting, vaccinating the embryos to prepare them for their life in foreign countries or for whatever it is they're going to be doing. The embryos are prepared before birth to fulfill certain functions in society. And because they will fulfill those functions, they will feel self-fulfilled and happy. The message is subtle programming. And it's very, very, very much more subtle today than it was then when Huxley and Orwell were writing. Today we are still being programmed through television and media. That's why they call it television programs, because we are being programmed. So, as I said, those are not accurate prophecies, accurate predictions. They are very simply stark warnings to us that these are the kind of societies that could emerge, could develop. This is what could happen if we hand over our sovereignty.
These two novels are gifts of insight to us, and we must listen. Ignore them at your peril. We've already got the Ministry of Truth that is censoring any points of view that are contrary to the narrative. We have the Behavioural Insights team that are profiling us and developing ways in which we can be manipulated. We've got the government telling us that the introduction of poorly tested vaccines into our body is safe. And really, they don't know. So we see how this is developing. We're at the very early stages of this now. We can't let this continue any longer. So thanks for joining us in this series. We really appreciate your attention and your point of view about what we're doing here. We'll be back again shortly. We're not leaving the planet. But for now, thanks.
And we started this series in the very first video by asking you to start questioning, and by that questioning then you will initiate your awakening process. And we know that thousands more people are waking up every day and beginning to question the things we should be questioning. So we ask you to continue questioning and to develop your awakening process even further, because we're all going towards on the path of full awakening. So my final message is, as well as namaste, wakey wakey.
Awake and stay awake. Namaste.